A senior flight attendant with 22 years of impeccable service reviews spilled scalding coffee on an infant's skin at 35,000 feet, then blamed the father for not holding his child properly. What she didn't know was that the woman in seat 3A, the one who'd been quietly watching her selective service for the past hour, carried a badge that could ground her career permanently. This is the story of how Brenda Walsh lost everything she'd built in aviation, because she couldn't see past her assumptions about who deserved comfort, and how one moment of documented negligence revealed a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Some mistakes end careers, others expose the systems that enabled them. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 100 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. The business class cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight 847 from Chicago to Seattle settled into its pre-departure rhythm with the familiar choreography of premium air travel. Passengers arranged their comfort, laptops emerging from leather bags, noise-canceling headphones finding their place, jackets tucked into overhead bins with the casual efficiency of frequent travelers. Marcus Thompson buckled his 8-month-old daughter, Zara, into the FAA-approved car seat he'd installed in the window seat of row 7. Her brown eyes tracked the movement around her with infant curiosity, one small fist clutching the edge of her purple blanket. Marcus had packed meticulously for this trip, bottles pre-measured, diapers organized in zippered pouches, changes of clothes rolled tight in his carry-on. His company had sent him to a conference in Chicago, and he'd earned this business-class ticket through miles accumulated on dozens of work trips just like this one. Brenda Walsh moved through the cabin with the practiced authority of someone who'd worked this route for longer than some of her colleagues had been alive. Her four-striped wings caught the overhead lights as she paused to greet passengers, her smile broad and genuine when she reached row 3. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Reynolds. Can I get you started with a mimosa? I remember you prefer the drier champagne blend." The woman in 3C, silver hair styled in a neat bob, pearl earrings, designer reading glasses on a chain, lit up with recognition. "Brenda, yes, you remember. That would be lovely." Brenda touched her arm warmly before moving on, stopping again at row 5 where a middle-aged couple was settling in. "Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman, wonderful to see you again. I'll have your usual gin and tonics ready right after takeoff." She continued down the aisle, her warmth dimming slightly as she passed Marcus without acknowledgement, her gaze flicking over him and Zara with the neutral expression of someone processing inventory rather than greeting passengers. Marcus noticed but didn't react. He'd learned years ago that some people's hospitality had conditions attached, and making an issue of a missing greeting wasn't worth the energy. He had bigger concerns. Zara would need a bottle soon, and he'd hoped to warm it before she got fussy. Diane Cooper, seated in 3A by the window, observed the interaction from behind her tablet. To any casual observer, she appeared absorbed in a spreadsheet, her business-casual clothing and unremarkable presence marking her as just another corporate traveler. But Diane had been a federal air marshal for 19 years, and her job was to see what others missed. She noted the differential warmth in Brenda's greetings, the way the flight attendant's body language shifted as she moved through the cabin. Pattern recognition was Diane's specialty, and patterns were beginning to emerge. 20 minutes later, as the plane pushed back from the gate, Marcus pressed his call button. Zara was starting to squirm, making the small sounds that preceded crying, soft grunts of discomfort that any parent recognized as a warning. The call light glowed amber above his seat. Brenda passed by twice without stopping, her attention focused on collecting pre-departure beverage orders in the forward cabin. Marcus waited, gentle bouncing Zara against his shoulder. 5 minutes stretched to 7. The third time Brenda passed, Marcus spoke directly. "Excuse me, could I get some hot water to warm a bottle?" Brenda paused, her expression neutral. "We'll be doing beverage service after takeoff, sir." "I understand, but she's getting hungry now. I have the bottle ready. I just need hot water from the galley." "As I said, we'll be around with service shortly." Her tone had an edge of finality, the unspoken message clear: wait your turn. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the calculation every black parent learned to make about when to push and when to let something go. He glanced down at Zara, whose face was reddening with pre-cry tension. "It'll just take a minute. I can come back to the galley if that's easier." "Sir, passengers need to remain seated during taxi. I'll get to you when I can." Brenda moved away before he could respond, immediately stopping at row 5 to ask Mrs. Hoffman if she'd like her gin and tonic now or after takeoff. Diane watched the exchange, her fingers pausing over her tablet. She noted the time stamp mentally, the way Brenda had prioritized passengers she'd greeted by name while deflecting Marcus's request with policy language she'd just bent for others. The plane took off smoothly, climbing into clear afternoon skies. Zara began to cry in earnest now, her hunger overriding the distraction of motion and light. Marcus rocked her gently, murmuring soft reassurances, acutely aware of the attention infant crying drew in enclosed spaces. He saw passengers glancing back, some sympathetic, others irritated. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, Brenda appeared with the beverage cart, working her way down the aisle with efficient cheer. She handed Ms. Reynolds her mimosa with a warm comment about the weather in Seattle. She delivered the Hoffman's gin and tonics with a knowing smile. When she reached row 7, her expression flattened. "What can I get you?" "Hot water, please, for her bottle, and just regular water for me." Brenda pulled a bottle of room-temperature water from the cart and set it on Marcus's tray table. "There's your water." "I meant hot water. For the bottle." Marcus gestured to the prepared bottle he'd placed in the seat pocket. "We don't heat bottles. Liability issue." Marcus kept his voice even despite Zara's escalating cries. "Other airlines have let me use hot water from the coffee maker. I'm not asking you to heat it, just water I can warm it in." Brenda's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sir, if you'd prepared properly for traveling with an infant, you'd have brought supplies that don't require our assistance. We're here for safety and beverage service, not childcare." The words landed like a slap. Marcus felt his face warm, felt the attention of surrounding passengers shifting toward them. Zara wailed louder, sensing his tension. "I'm not asking for childcare. I'm asking for hot water, something you've given to passengers for tea this entire service." Those were paying business-class customers who made reasonable requests. Brenda's voice carried now, loud enough for nearby rows to hear clearly. Not courtesy upgrades who expect special treatment. The assumption hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had paid for this seat with miles he'd earned through work travel, but Brenda had looked at him, at his skin, at his infant daughter, at his presence in this cabin, and constructed a different story. Diane set down her tablet. Marcus held Brenda's gaze, his voice quiet and controlled. "I paid for this seat, and I'm asking for hot water. That's not special treatment, that's basic service." "The answer is no. Please keep your voice down. You're disturbing other passengers." Brenda moved the cart forward, turning her back to him deliberately. Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders to relax. He pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app, typing quickly, "Flight 847 ORDC, 2:47 p.m. Fa Brenda refused hot water for infant bottle, implied I was courtesy upgrade, told me to prepare properly. Denied service given to others." Zara's cries had reached the pitch that made other passengers shift uncomfortably. Marcus lifted her from the car seat and held her against his chest, rocking gently, his free hand rubbing circles on her back. He began to sing softly, a lullaby his own mother had sung to him, his voice barely above a whisper. It wouldn't solve her hunger, but it might buy him time. In seat 3A, Diane's eyes never left Brenda as the flight attendant completed her beverage service. All smiles and warmth for everyone except the man in row 7, whose daughter cried from hunger his request could have solved. Patterns, Diane thought, always patterns. 40 minutes into the flight, Zara had exhausted herself into a fitful, hiccuping sleep against Marcus's shoulder. His shirt was damp with her tears and drool, his arm numb from holding her in the same position, afraid to move and wake her. He hadn't touched his water. The room temperature bottle sat useless in the seat pocket. The cabin had settled into cruise altitude tranquility, passengers reading, working, sleeping behind eye masks. Marcus stared out the window at clouds stretched like cotton below them, feeling the exhaustion that came from high-alert parenting while being made to feel unwelcome. He heard the galley curtain rustle and turned slightly. Brenda emerged carrying a fresh pot of coffee, its glass carafe catching the light. She moved down the aisle offering refills, her movements efficient but not rushed. There was no turbulence, no roughness to the air. The seatbelt sign had been off for nearly half an hour. "More coffee, Ms. Reynolds." "Oh, yes, please. This is delicious." Brenda poured with practiced steadiness, not spilling a drop. She moved to the Hoffmans, refilled Mr. Hoffman's cup, exchanged a comment about the conference they were heading to. She continued down the aisle, the pot still half full, steam rising from its spout. As she approached row 7, her pace didn't slow. She was looking forward, toward passengers in the rows behind Marcus, already forming her next greeting. Marcus sensed her approach but stayed still, not wanting to disturb Zara. He was half-turned toward the window, his daughter's head on his shoulder, his body curved protectively around her small form. Brenda's hip bumped the back of Marcus's seat, not hard, but solid enough to jostle it. The coffee pot tipped forward. Scalding liquid arced through the air and splashed across Zara's exposed arm and the side of her torso, where her onesie had ridden up, hitting skin that had never known anything hotter than bathwater. The scream that tore from Zara was primal, instant, the shriek of sudden agony that only a child in true pain makes. Marcus jerked forward, his entire body flooded with adrenaline and horror as his daughter convulsed in his arms, her skin already reddening where the coffee had made contact. "Oh my God, baby." Marcus pulled Zara's clothing away from the burn, his hands shaking, his mind racing through every fragment of first aid knowledge he had while his daughter screamed and screamed. Brenda stumbled back, the pot still in her hand, coffee dripping from its spout onto the carpet. Her face had gone pale, eyes wide. For 3 full seconds, she stood frozen. Then she spoke, her voice sharp with something between panic and defensiveness. "There was turbulence, I couldn't help it." Marcus wasn't listening. He jabbed the call button repeatedly with his free hand while trying to examine Zara's burn. The skin on her inner forearm was bright red, already beginning to blister. "I need ice. I need water. She needs a doctor. Someone call ahead." Passengers were standing now, several reaching across the aisle. A woman from row 8 thrust a bottle of water toward him. Here, pour this on it." Another voice, "Should we get the first aid kit?" Marcus grabbed the water with trembling hands and carefully poured it over Zara's arm, trying to cool the burn while she writhed and screamed. Her cries had changed pitch, gone hoarse with pain that wouldn't stop. Brenda set the coffee pot on an empty tray table, her movements mechanical. "Sir, you need to keep her calm." "Keep her calm. You just dumped boiling coffee on my baby." It was turbulence, the plane moved. There was no turbulence. The shout came from Marcus and 2 other passengers simultaneously. The junior flight attendant, Tim, appeared from the rear galley, eyes wide with alarm. "What happened?" "I need ice immediately," Marcus managed, his voice cracking. "And blankets, and whatever medical supplies you have. Call ahead, she needs to go straight to a hospital when we land." Tim nodded and disappeared into the forward galley. Brenda's face had hardened now, defense mechanisms clicking into place. She looked at Marcus, at his position in the seat, at how he'd been holding Zara. If you'd been holding her properly, facing forward with her secured, this wouldn't have happened. Passengers are supposed to. Don't. The single word came from row 3, quiet but absolute in its authority. Everyone turned. Diane Cooper stood in the aisle, tablet in hand, her expression still calm but her presence suddenly commanding in a way that made every passenger in earshot go silent. She looked at Brenda directly. Don't finish that sentence. Brenda blinked, confused by the interruption. Ma'am, I understand this is upsetting, but... I said don't. Diane stepped into the aisle fully now, and something in the way she moved, the controlled precision, the absolute certainty, made Brenda take a half step back. Diane turned to Marcus, her voice gentling. Sir, I'm a federal air marshal. I'm taking control of this situation. Keep cooling that burn. Medical assistance is being coordinated. Marcus stared at her, still rocking Zara, whose cries had diminished to agonized whimpers. He nodded, unable to form words. Diane looked at Brenda again. You're going to the rear galley. Now, the junior attendant will handle medical assistance up here. I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. And I'm federal law enforcement, and I've just witnessed what appears to be negligent conduct resulting in injury to a minor. Diane's voice never rose, but it cut through every word Brenda tried to form. You can walk to the rear galley, or I can escort you. Choose. Brenda's mouth opened, closed. Her face had gone from pale to flushed. This is highly irregular. Rear galley, last time I'm saying it. Brenda went, her movements stiff with humiliation and barely contained anger. Tim returned with ice wrapped in a cloth napkin and the first aid kit. His hands shook slightly as he handed them to Marcus. I've notified the captain. We're calling ahead for an ambulance to meet us at the gate. Is there anything else? Just stay with him, Diane said quietly. Make sure he has everything he needs. She moved forward toward the cockpit, pulling out her badge and credentials. In row 7, Marcus held his daughter and pressed the cool cloth gently against her burned skin, murmuring words that meant nothing except that he was there. He was there, he was so sorry, he would make it better. Zara's whimpers broke his heart in ways he didn't know were possible. And somewhere behind him, he knew, there were witnesses. There was evidence. There would be accountability. The cockpit door opened after Diane's knock, a brief interruption following established protocol. She showed her credentials to Captain Mitchell through the small opening, spoke briefly, and received a nod. The door closed again. When Diane returned to the cabin, her demeanor hadn't changed, but her authority was now official and communicated. She stopped at row 7 first. How is she? Diane asked quietly. Marcus looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion and fear. Zara had quieted to occasional shuddering breaths, her face pressed against his chest, the cool cloth on her arm. The skin was angry red, 2 small blisters forming. I think the cold water helped, but she needs a doctor. Marcus's voice was hoarse. How long until we land? About 90 minutes. The captain has confirmed emergency medical response at the gate. You'll be first off the aircraft. Thank you, Marcus paused. You said you're an air marshal. I am, and I've been on this flight since boarding, which means I observed the entire interaction, from the initial beverage service to the incident. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, hope, maybe, or just the relief of being believed. She wouldn't give me hot water. She said I should have prepared better, called me a courtesy upgrade. I know, I heard it, and I recorded time stamps. Diane's expression remained neutral, but her tone carried weight. Right now, focus on your daughter. I'm documenting everything else. She moved to row 8, speaking quietly to the passengers who'd witnessed the coffee spill. I'm going to need brief statements from anyone who saw what happened. Just the facts, what you observed, the sequence of events. Can I count on you? 3 passengers nodded immediately. A fourth raised her hand. I got video. I was filming my daughter sleeping across the aisle, and when I heard the screaming, I turned my phone. I caught the aftermath and the flight attendant's response. Don't delete that. I'll need your contact information and a copy of that footage. Diane pulled out a small notebook, the kind detectives used, and began taking names. In the rear galley, Brenda stood with her arms crossed, her face a mixture of indignation and growing concern. The junior flight attendant, Tim, had positioned himself nearby. Uncertain of his role, but aware that something significant was unfolding. Diane approached with the same measured calm she'd maintained throughout. Ms. Walsh, I need your full name and employee identification number. I don't have to give you anything. I'm a senior flight attendant with 22 years. You're a crew member who was just involved in an incident causing injury to a passenger while I, a federal air marshal, was present and observing. You can provide your information voluntarily, or I can request it through the captain, who will then be required to file an additional report. Your choice. Brenda's jaw worked. She gave her information in clipped syllables. Walk me through what happened, Diane said, pen poised. There was turbulence, the plane jolted, the coffee spilled, it was an accident. There was no turbulence. The seatbelt sign has been off for 40 minutes. The flight has been smooth since we reached altitude. I felt the plane move. I'm a federal air marshal. I'm trained to identify aircraft movement that could indicate security threats. There was no turbulence at the time of the incident. Diane's voice remained even. What I observed was you walking at normal speed, not adjusting for any roughness, carrying a pot of hot liquid through the cabin while focused on passengers ahead of you. Your hip made contact with the back of seat 7A. The coffee spilled as a result of that contact. Brenda's face flushed darker. It was an accident. I'm not disputing that the spill itself was unintentional. I'm documenting the circumstances. What I'm more concerned about is what happened next. I don't know what you mean. After the coffee spilled, you blamed turbulence that didn't exist. Then you suggested the father wasn't holding his daughter properly, implying the injury was somehow his fault. You did not immediately call for medical assistance. You did not apologize. You prioritized defending yourself over helping an injured infant. I was in shock. You were in professional mode, Diane corrected, and your professional instinct was to deflect responsibility. But here's what concerns me more, Ms. Walsh. She flipped back a page in her notebook. This wasn't an isolated incident of poor service. From the moment passengers boarded, I observed differential treatment. The man in 7A pressed his call button and waited 8 minutes for a response. You passed his row 3 times without stopping. When he requested hot water to warm his infant's bottle, a service you'd provided to other passengers in the form of hot water for tea, you refused on the basis of policy. You then suggested he should have prepared properly and referred to him as a courtesy upgrade, implying he didn't pay for his seat. Brenda's mouth opened, but no words came out. Were those your words, Ms. Walsh? Did you tell the passenger in 7A that he was a courtesy upgrade? A long pause, then quietly, I might have said something like that. Based on what information? Silence. You didn't check his ticket class. You didn't ask how he booked his seat. You saw a young black man with an infant in business class and assumed he didn't belong there. Diane let the words settle. That assumption colored every interaction you had with him, culminating in your refusal to provide basic service that contributed to the conditions leading to this incident. That's not I don't, Brenda's voice cracked. I treat all passengers equally. You don't. I watched you for over an hour. I have time stamps. I have witness statements. And the aircraft's cabin camera system, which I'll be requesting through the airline security office, will corroborate everything I observed. Brenda seemed to shrink, her 4-stripe wings suddenly heavy on her uniform. You'll remain in this galley for the duration of the flight. Diane continued. Tim will handle cabin service. When we land, you'll wait until all passengers have deplaned, at which point the captain and I will escort you to a meeting with airport security and the airline's operations manager. Do you understand? Brenda nodded mutely. Diane closed her notebook and returned to the main cabin, stopping once more at row 7. Marcus had managed to get Zara to drink a little water. Her arm remained wrapped in the cool cloth, her body limp with exhausted pain against his chest. She'd stopped crying, but her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "We'll be landing in about an hour," Diane said quietly. "I've documented everything. The airline will conduct a full investigation, and you'll have my report and contact information for any legal proceedings you choose to pursue." Marcus looked at her, his own eyes red-rimmed. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's my job to keep people safe on aircraft. That includes protecting them from negligence and discrimination." She paused. "And because I have a daughter, I know what it feels like to watch your child hurt and not be able to fix it immediately." "Thank you," Marcus whispered. Diane nodded and returned to her seat, pulling out her tablet to begin the formal incident report that would land on multiple desks within hours of landing. The plane flew on through clear skies, carrying a little girl with burned skin, a father who'd been dismissed and blamed, and a flight attendant who just learned that not every witness is powerless. The plane touched down at SeaTac International at 4:47 p.m. local time. As promised, emergency medical personnel boarded immediately after the seatbelt sign extinguished, moving directly to row 7 where Marcus still held Zara. "Let us see her, sir," the paramedic said gently. She was young, efficient, her eyes kind as she knelt in the aisle. Marcus reluctantly shifted Zara so the paramedic could examine the burn. Second-degree burn, approximately 4 inches by 2 inches on the inner forearm, with smaller splash marks on the torso. The paramedic's partner was already pulling supplies from their kit. "We're going to dress this and transport her for evaluation. You'll ride with us?" "Yes, absolutely. We've got you." Diane stood in the aisle as the medical team worked, ensuring no one disturbed the process. Other passengers gathered belongings quietly, many throwing sympathetic glances toward Marcus. The woman from row 8, the one with the video, paused to slip him her business card. "I'm sending the footage to you and to the marshal," she whispered. "I hope your baby's okay." After the medical team departed with Marcus and Zara, Diane approached the cockpit. Captain Mitchell emerged, his expression grave. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, and had clearly been briefed on what transpired in his cabin. "Federal Air Marshal Cooper, I understand we have a serious incident." "We do, Captain. I'll need full access to the cabin camera footage for my report. I also need Ms. Walsh kept in the rear galley until we can coordinate with airline management and airport security." "Already arranged. Operations manager is meeting us at the gate." He paused. "I've been flying for 28 years. Never had something like this happen on my watch." "Unfortunately, it happens more than people realize. Usually it just doesn't get witnessed by law enforcement." 20 minutes later, in a windowless office in the secure area of SeaTac's Operations Center, Brenda Walsh sat across from Janet Ortega, Horizon Atlantic's Regional Operations Manager, Captain Mitchell, Diane Cooper, and an airport security liaison. Janet Ortega was a woman in her early 50s who'd risen through airline management the hard way, and her expression suggested this meeting was the last place she wanted to be. She set a tablet on the table showing paused cabin footage from Flight 847. "Ms. Walsh, before we begin the formal review, I want to confirm you've been advised of your rights to have a union representative present." "I don't need a representative. I didn't do anything wrong." Brenda's voice was defensive, brittle. "Then let's review what happened." Janet tapped the tablet and footage began to play. The video showed the cabin from an overhead angle, capturing rows 3 through 9. There was Brenda moving through beverage service, warm with some passengers, perfunctory with Marcus. There was Marcus's call button glowing, ignored. There was the refusal of hot water, captured in body language even without audio. There was the moment when Brenda's hip bumped the seat and coffee arced through the air, and the frozen beat before Brenda moved. The audio was clearer than expected. If you'd been holding her properly, facing forward with her secured, this wouldn't have happened. Janet stopped the video. Ms. Walsh explained this statement. I was trying to help him understand proper safety positioning. After you spilled scalding coffee on his infant, Janet's voice was flat. Your first instinct was to blame the parent. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? Diane asked. Because what I heard. And what this footage shows is you deflecting responsibility for your negligence onto the victim. Janet started another clip, this one from earlier in the flight. This is you passing row 7 3 times while the call button was illuminated. Can you explain why you didn't respond? I was busy with other passengers. Let me show you what you were busy with. Janet skipped forward to show Brenda laughing with Ms. Reynolds, chatting with the Hoffmans, double-checking another passenger's drink order. You had time for extended conversations with passengers you knew by name. You didn't have time for 8 minutes to respond to a call button for a passenger you didn't. Brenda said nothing. Now let's talk about the comment caught on multiple passenger witness statements. Janet read from a printed document. Those were paying business class customers who made reasonable requests, not courtesy upgrades who expect special treatment. Did you say this to Mr. Thompson? A long silence. I may have. On what basis did you believe Mr. Thompson was a courtesy upgrade? I thought I just assumed. Based on what? Janet's tone sharpened. His appearance, the fact that he's a young black man with an infant. No, I would never. Then explain your assumption, because you certainly didn't check his ticket class or booking record before making that comment. Brenda's face crumpled. I don't know, it seemed like. It seemed like he didn't belong in business class because of how he looked. Janet set down the paper. Ms. Walsh, this airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. We also have strict standards for safety and passenger care. You violated both today. It was an accident, the coffee. The spill may have been unintentional. The differential treatment that preceded it was not. The failure to provide basic service was not. The victim blaming after injury occurred was not. Janet's expression was stone. I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. You'll surrender your badge and crew identification now. You're not to have any contact with Mr. Thompson or any passengers from this flight. Do you understand? Brenda fumbled with her badge, her hands shaking. The 4-stripe wings she'd worn with such pride came off her uniform like dead weight. The investigation will take approximately 2 weeks, Janet continued. You'll be notified of our findings and any disciplinary action through your union representative. If there are further legal proceedings, you'll be contacted separately. But I've worked here for 22 years. Then you should have known better, Janet stood. Captain Mitchell, thank you for your cooperation. Marshal Cooper, my office will provide any documentation you need for your report. This meeting is concluded. The investigation took 11 days. In that time, Diane submitted a 17-page report detailing every observation she'd made, supplemented by cabin footage, passenger witness statements, and the video captured by the woman in row 8. The footage showed not just the incident itself, but the pattern of differential treatment throughout the flight. Marcus provided medical records showing Zara's second-degree burn required ongoing wound care and pain management. He also provided the notes he'd typed during the flight, documenting each interaction with Brenda. 6 other passengers submitted statements corroborating the timeline and Brenda's comments. On day 11, Janet Ortega drafted her findings. Following comprehensive review of video evidence, federal air marshal testimony, passenger statements, medical records, and employee history, this investigation concludes that flight attendant Brenda Walsh violated company policies regarding 1. Discrimination in service delivery based on passenger race. 2. Negligence in carrying hot beverages through the cabin. 3. Failure to follow emergency medical protocols. 4. Attempting to deflect responsibility for passenger injury onto the victim. While Ms. Walsh's 22-year tenure has been largely without incident, this investigation uncovered evidence suggesting a pattern of differential treatment in passenger interactions that had not been previously documented or addressed. The severity of the outcome, injury to a minor, combined with the clear evidence of discriminatory service practices, leaves the airline no alternative but to terminate employment effective immediately. The letter was delivered to Brenda's home the same day. It was filed with the FAA as part of a mandatory incident report. 3 days later, Marcus's attorney filed a civil lawsuit against Horizon Atlantic Airways for negligence, discrimination, and infliction of emotional distress. The case settled out of court 6 weeks later for an undisclosed 7-figure amount, with the airline admitting no wrongdoing, but agreeing to implement enhanced bias training and update their service protocols. The FAA used the incident as a case study in a new training module on implicit bias and passenger care, distributed to every commercial airline in the United States. Brenda Walsh applied for positions with 3 other airlines. None called her back. When she tried to work for a private charter service, they requested a reference from her last employer. The reference was factual, neutral, and damning, terminated following documented incident of discriminatory service and passenger injury. Her 22 years of wings and seniority meant nothing anymore. She'd lost not just her job but her identity, the role she'd built her entire adult life around. The social media backlash, when news of the incident leaked, was brutal. She closed all her accounts and moved to a different city, taking a job in retail that had nothing to do with aviation. She would never serve passengers again. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the jetway of SeaTac International, Zara balanced on his hip. She was 14 months old now, toddling everywhere, babbling in the half-language of children just learning words. The scar on her inner forearm had faded to a pale line, still visible, always would be, but no longer angry or raised. He was flying to Chicago for another work conference. Business class, earned through miles, this time without dread. As he stepped onto the aircraft, a flight attendant greeted him immediately, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard. Is this your little one?" She smiled at Zara, who hid her face in Marcus's shoulder shyly. "We have a bottle warmer in the galley if you need it, and I can bring extra water anytime. Just let me know." Marcus felt tension he didn't know he was carrying release from his shoulders. "Thank you. I appreciate that." "Of course. Let me help you get that car seat installed." She did, efficiently and warmly, chatting with Zara, asking Marcus if he needed anything else. "Actually, I'm good," he said and meant it. He settled into his seat, buckled Zara into hers, and pulled out his phone. He opened an app he'd created using part of the settlement, the Family Travel Safety Fund, which provided grants to parents who couldn't afford proper travel gear and offered free resources on passenger rights. The app had been downloaded 47,000 times in 3 months. In his email, there was a message from Diane Cooper. They'd stayed in touch. She was speaking at an aviation safety conference about the role of federal air marshals in documenting discriminatory practices. She'd asked Marcus if he wanted to participate on a panel about passenger advocacy. He wrote back, "Yes, I'll be there." Zara grabbed at his phone and he shifted it away gently, offering her a teething toy instead. She gummed it happily, her brown eyes bright and healthy. The plane pushed back from the gate. The flight attendant came by once more, checking that everyone was settled. She caught Marcus's eye and smiled. "If you need anything at all during the flight, you just let me know. Anything." "Thank you," Marcus said again. The service he received on this flight was exemplary, attentive but not hovering, warm without being intrusive. Everything Brenda could have provided but chose not to. When they landed in Chicago, Zara was asleep, content unharmed. Marcus gathered his things and stepped off the plane into the bustle of O'Hare, carrying his daughter and the knowledge that what had happened on Flight 847 had changed things, not just for him, but for the policies airlines were now required to follow, for the training crew members received, for the passengers who would never know their flight was safer because one federal air marshal had paid attention and refused to look away. Justice didn't erase scars, it didn't undo pain, but it created accountability. And sometimes, accountability meant the difference between a system that enabled harm and a system that worked to prevent it. There's a particular kind of power that comes with a uniform, with seniority, with 4 stripes on your wings, with 22 years of knowing an aircraft's rhythms better than most people know their own homes. It's easy to believe that kind of power makes you untouchable, that your judgment is always right, that your assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't are just instincts honed by experience. But power without accountability is just cruelty wearing professional clothes. Brenda Walsh didn't see herself as discriminatory. Most people who practice bias don't. They see themselves as efficient, as experienced, as simply recognizing patterns. They tell themselves they're treating everyone the same while their actions tell a different story. They warm the bottle for the passenger they assume belongs and cite policy for the one they assume doesn't. They smile at familiar faces and go neutral for unfamiliar ones. They blame turbulence that didn't exist and parents who were doing everything right. They forget that someone might be watching. That's the thing about accountability. It doesn't always announce itself. It sits quietly in seat 3A with a tablet and a badge, documenting every interaction, noting every discrepancy. It doesn't intervene at the first sign of poor service because it's building a pattern, establishing evidence, waiting for the moment when intervention can't be dismissed as overreaction. And when a child gets hurt, when negligence meets discrimination and produces injury that can't be argued away, accountability shows its face and says, "No more." This story isn't about vengeance. Brenda Walsh losing her career isn't a victory to celebrate. It's a consequence of choices she made repeatedly, a system finally working the way it should have been working all along. She had 22 years to treat passengers with equal respect. She had dozens of flights to practice service without prejudice. She had every opportunity to see a father with an infant and think, customer who needs assistance, instead of person who doesn't belong here. She chose otherwise every time. What matters now is what came after. The training modules that will reach thousands of flight attendants, the updated protocols, the parents who will board planes and receive service based on their needs rather than assumptions about their worth, the children who won't be harmed because someone learned from Brenda's mistakes even if she didn't learn in time to save her own career. That's what accountability looks like when it functions properly, not revenge but prevention. Not punishment for its own sake, but consequences that create change. Marcus Thompson didn't ask for any of this. He just wanted hot water for his daughter's bottle. But because he documented what happened, because he stayed calm when blamed, because he was unlucky enough to be seen as not belonging and lucky enough to have a federal air marshal witness his treatment, he became part of a larger story about how systems fail and how they can be forced to improve. His daughter will carry a small scar. He'll carry the memory of her screams. But they'll also carry the knowledge that what happened to them meant something beyond their own pain, that it mattered, that it was documented, that it changed things for others. That's not nothing. If this story made you think about how power is used, how assumptions shape the service people receive, how accountability only works when someone's watching with authority to act. Then it's done what it was meant to do. We grant authority to people in uniforms every day. We trust them to treat us fairly, to provide care without prejudice, to see us as human before they see us as categories. Most of them do. Most of them earn that trust. But the ones who don't, they rely on silence, on no one watching, on passengers assuming complaints won't be believed, or that differential treatment is just how things are. They rely on no one like Diane Cooper being in seat 3A. The question we should all carry from this story isn't whether Brenda Walsh deserved to lose her career. It's whether we'd recognize the Brenda Walshes in our own industries, our own institutions, our own behaviors. Whether we'd document, whether we'd speak up, whether we'd believe the Marcus Thompsons when they tell us something isn't right. Whether we'd be the witness who refuses to look away. Because that's how systems change, not through dramatic confrontations or cinematic justice, but through documentation, through patterns being named, through consequences being applied consistently, through someone paying attention and deciding it matters. If you found this story thought-provoking, share it. Let it be part of the conversation about accountability, about bias, about the small ways power gets misused every day and the mechanisms we have, when we use them, to make things better. Justice isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it's just a terminated employee, updated training, and a settlement that can't undo a scar. But it's also a child who boards her next flight and receives the service she deserves. It's a father who doesn't have to choose between advocating for his daughter and being labeled difficult. It's thousands of flight attendants who will think twice before letting assumptions guide their service. It's all of us being reminded that authority is conditional, that the uniforms we wear, the positions we hold, the power we're granted comes with the expectation that we'll use it fairly. And when we don't, when we let bias and assumption and the certainty of our own rightness override basic human decency, there might just be someone watching who has the power to say, "That's enough. No more. Not on my watch."